15. Guardians at the Gate of Dawn. The Doctor patted the side of the TARDIS fondly and stared out across the irrigated fields towards Kish. "They've been busy, haven't they?" he observed. The copper patterning was all over the stone walls now. They had almost finished the work during the past week. He had decided to come at precisely the right moment, as usual. Another example of prescience, he wondered, or just plain luck. Well, did it much matter as long as they were here?
"What is it for?"
Enkidu asked.
"To waste all that metal simply to make patterns? No, there must be a point to it."
"Quite right," the Doctor approved. For all his apparent similarity to an ape, Enkidu had a keen brain. "I've always been impressed by the reasoning powers of the Neanderthaler. Met one of your relatives a few thousand years from now who is pretty bright too." He smiled. "Think of Ishtar as a spider. This metal is her web within which she will entrap the minds and souls of everyone in Kish." Enkidu frowned as he considered the idea.
"She wants to take over the thoughts of all in the city."
"Oh, I suspect she has grander aims than that," the Doctor said airily. "The world, probably. Maybe even the cosmos. Depends on the blatant egocentricity of the creature. But Kish will serve her well for an appetizer, I should think." N'Gula struggled to take in this conversation. "Can we do something to stop her?" she asked. The Doctor smiled and tapped the side of his nose with the handle of his ever-present umbrella. "We can always do something," he replied. "The question is, will it be enough?" He pulled his cloak tighter about himself and gestured for the others to do the same. "Right, time to pay her a visit. Won't you come into my parlour?" The final part of the climb was the hardest. Ace scrambled uphill, stubbornly refusing Gilgamesh's offers of assistance. Her only consolation was that Avram was having a rougher time of the climb than she was. As a musician, he wasn't used to the rigours of mountaineering. Eventually, they reached the small pathway that Avram had been guiding them to, and paused for a rest. Gilgamesh didn't see the need for the break himself, but acquiesced to Ace's growls. "I do not think," he replied darkly, "that you should be taking command of this party. I am, after all, king. And you are just a woman." "Goddess," glared Ace back. "Remember that big bang I saved your neck with? Well, I could repeat it right here and take off all that ugly weight you're carrying on your shoulders. It would make the going quieter." He was clearly unwilling to push her that far. While she could see that he didn't really think she was divine, he obviously did recall her powers and was not going to challenge her authority directly. On the other hand, he was not going to give in to her with good grace. "I don't like this idea of talking to the Guardians," he objected. "If they are soldiers, then force is the only logic that they will respect." "Look, King," Ace snapped, "if it was up to me, I'd love you to go in there and get yourself cut to pieces by them. But the Doctor wants you in one piece, and I'm going to try my best to see you stay that way. If those Guardians have half the stuff I think they've got, they'd make a chicken a la king of you in seconds. So we do this my way, okay?" Her anger did get through to him and he subsided. "Very well," he said reluctantly. "For the moment we will do this as you wish. But if it doesn't work, then it's my turn." He fingered the edge of his axe. "Agreed?" "Whatever you say," replied Ace. "Okay, Avram, let's finish this leg of the trip." She pulled herself to her feet and she and Gilgamesh followed the songsmith down the narrow pathway between the rocks. Within a few moments the mountains had closed in on them and they were winding their way down between two walls of sheer granite. In a way it was very beautiful, but she was in no mood to appreciate the fact. Her feet hurt, her temper was frayed, and she had a growing suspicion that the Doctor was up to something behind her back. The sooner this trip was over, the better. Avram halted abruptly and gestured ahead of them. "The Guardians," he breathed. Ace shouldered him gently aside, and her gaze followed the curve of their trail. It was worse than she had expected. The Guardians of the Dawn were not soldiers in spacesuits. They were robots. There were two of them, each about 8 feet tall. Humanoid in shape, they stood at attention. Long metal legs were hooked to a squat body. 2 long jointed arms ended in claws fitted with what looked like needle-pointed guns. Atop each body, with no intervening neck, sat a head of sorts. They had eyes like camera lenses, small gratings below the eyes, and then what seemed to be antennae or mandibles sticking out from the lower part of the faces. Ace didn't like to think what they were for. She stepped forward. 2 heads spun to face her, and the arms clicked up, weapons covering the small group. She braced herself for attack, but the robots intoned in unison, "Approach and identify." The voices were metallic, but they were neither lifeless nor monotonous. They sounded almost like the buzzing of wasps. Ace moved forward hesitantly, followed by Avram and a very quiet Gilgamesh. Something had finally managed to make an impression on his ego, it seemed. The 2 robots' heads clicked slightly and spun to face each other. Both Guardians produced several of the buzzing noises before their heads rotated back to face the trio. "Approach," the first one repeated. "Identify," added the second. There was a slight difference in pitch between the 2 voices. Ace mentally christened them 1 and 2. "We are approaching," she said. "And I'm Ace. These are Avram and Gilgamesh." She gestured towards her companions. The robot heads followed her movements, resting for a long moment on Avram's nervous features. "Returned," one said, then buzzed. "Singer," Avram added 2. "State," one told Ace. "Your purpose," 2 completed. Not knowing which of them to look at, Ace shrugged. "We're here to see Utnapishtim." "Not possible," one clicked. "Sees no one," 2 explained. "Nurgle's blood," Gilgamesh growled, unsheathing his axe. "I told you it was a mistake to try and talk to these creatures. Let me take them apart." "Attack," hummed one. "Illogical," added 2. Before Gilgamesh could make a move, both robots spat laser beams from their mandibles. A rock beside the king glowed and melted into a small pool of slag. Gilgamesh did an almost comic double-take and realised that he was outmatched. Carefully, he replaced his axe over his shoulder. "Wise move." The robots turned back to Ace. "Utnapishtim is to be protected." Mentally cursing Gilgamesh, Ace tried again. "We're not here to harm him," she said. "We're here to ask his help." The robot heads regarded Gilgamesh again. "Some," began one. "Help," finished 2. "Don't blame him," Ace sighed. "He can't help being over-aggressive. But Avram and I aren't like that." "Avram isn't," robots agreed. "But you..." Carefully, slowly, Ace took her hands from her pockets. In her right hand, she held Ishtar's bomb. The Guardian's arms swiveled up to train on her. "Wait!" she called out. "It's safe!" The antennae twitched. "So it is." The arms stayed in position, however. "Explain your actions." Moving slowly towards the 2 poised robots, Ace held out the bomb. "Look at this! Could anyone from this cultural time period have constructed such a device?" The antennae twitched again, a little longer this time. "No," one agreed. "It was built on Anu," 2 completed. "Interesting. Where did you get it?" Ace was beginning to think she should have called them Tweedledee and Tweedledum. She explained. "It comes from a wrecked escape capsule near the cities of Kish and Uruk." The robot's heads swiveled to regard each other. "Wait a moment." There was a short pause, during which Ace could hear the sounds of machinery emanating from the robots. Then she felt a slight tug on her arm. "What are they doing?" Avram asked, looking worried. "Probably communicating with Utnapishtim or one of his people," Ace told him. "There's only one conclusion that they can come to, that Ishtar escaped their attack on her. They're bound to want to know more." The 2 heads swiveled back to cover them. "Passage agreed," they said. "Follow this path." Ace replaced the bomb in her jacket pocket and sauntered up to the robots. She patted them as she passed. "Good boys," she approved. "Praise, non-essential." Gilgamesh favoured them both with a much darker stare, but kept his temper in check as he moved beyond them. Avram brought up the rear, smiling nervously at the unresponsive robots. Ace led the way down the narrow chasm. When she looked over her shoulder, both Guardians were ignoring the human party and were watching the approach once again. "Weird," she muttered. "Now what?" Gilgamesh asked her crossly. "Does this path lead to Utnapishtim?" "Let's hope so. We'd better follow it to find out, hadn't we?" "Well, I don't like it at all." Gilgamesh pointed up the sheer cliffs of rock on both sides of them. "All an enemy has to do is to drop stones on us from above, and we're doomed. We have no room to fight in here. It stinks of treachery."
"Look, Rocks for Brains," Ace told him. "If they'd wanted to kill us, those two guardians back there could have fried us where we stood, and nothing you or I could have done would have stopped them. We're safe here, just as long as we do exactly what we're told."
"No man tells Gilgamesh what to do," the king complained, scowling. "And no woman either, even if she claims to be a goddess." He looked pointedly at Ace. "I am willing to go along with your schemes only so far, Aya." This was all she needed. Gilgamesh in a grouchy mood and itching for a fight. It was like having to deal with a child, constantly keeping him in line. What had she ever done to deserve this? Hoping that the walk would tire him out, she marched on round the next bend in the canyon and stopped dead. The passageway opened out abruptly as the cliffs retreated on either side. They were on the rim of a vast hollow in the mountains into which the pathway now led downwards. She looked about her and saw that the cliffs circled to meet on the far side of a huge lake. Abruptly, she realised where they were.
"It's an extinct volcano!" she exclaimed. "A lot of them have lakes in their centres like this."
Avram nodded. "There are tales that this mountain once was host to the gods," he told her. "The smoke from their feasting fires rose for many years, then stopped. The gods moved on."
"I hope this was a long time ago," she muttered. She couldn't quite recall, but she vaguely remembered something about extinct volcanoes having lakes in them. Or was that just wishful thinking on her part?
"Down there," Gilgamesh growled, pointing. Following the line of his finger, Ace saw that there was a small shack of some sort by the water's edge. Next to it was an even smaller boat. "Think you that is where Upnapishtim lives?"
"It seems a bit grubby," Ace replied uncertainly. "I'd expected something much larger and metallic."
The sun didn't penetrate into the crater.
Peering, she asked, "Is that some kind of island in the centre of the lake there?"
"Perhaps," the king agreed. "In this shadow it is hard to tell. I never trust the dark. Anything might lurk within its embrace. Still, things may be more visible when we reach the house." Ace agreed, and they started off down the slope towards the small building. It was easy going, perhaps a bit too easy. Stones rolled out from under their feet, gathering momentum as they skittered down the slope. The ground levelled as they approached the lip of stone that the shack stood on. To Ace's keen gaze it seemed a peculiar building. It looked as if it had been carved out of whitish plastic, instead of the wood or stone or brick of the buildings in Kish and Uruk. As she drew closer, she realised that her guess had been correct. The hut was made from some sort of artificial material. It wasn't large, about 20 feet long and wide and about 8 tall. There were no windows and a single door. Feeling somewhat uncertain, she approached and lifted her hand to knock. "Not much point," a voice said lazily from the direction of the boat. They spun around to see a gaunt figure unfolding from within it, yawning. "There's nobody inside, just me out here." Ninani sat before the polished metal of her mirror, carefully applying the kohl makeup to line her eyes. She would have to look her best when she met her father later this afternoon. King Aga had been in a constant foul temper since his last conversation with Ishtar. Ninani was determined to break him out of it, provided, of course, Ishtar had not yet discovered the plotting that she had tried to do against the goddess. It gave her chills just to think about that. It was more than a week since Engula had vanished, and nothing had been said about the young priestess having visited the princess. Was it possible that no one had known of it? Or did Ishtar know that the two girls had been conspirators and was simply biding her time? Swallowing her doubts and fears, Ninani reflected that she was probably not cut out to be a conspirator. It was too hard on her stomach and nerves. There was a quiet rapping on the door. Assuming it was Pwabi with fresh clothing, Ninani called out imperiously for her to enter. Gazing into the mirror, she smeared the kohl across half her face in panic at what she saw there. Engula had returned. With a cry, Ninani spun about, torn between her terror that Engula was a ghost and her expectation that the girl would be followed through the door by the temple guards
and an order for the arrest of the princess. Instead, the priestess was followed by two improbable figures, both swathed in the robes of merchants. Falling to her knees, Engula kissed the closest of the princess's feet. "Lady," she murmured. Panic was followed in Ninani's mind by caution. One of the two odd figures closed the door silently, after glancing into the corridor to be certain that they were not observed. The princess managed to shake off her fears and could not restrain her curiosity. "Engula," she asked, "where have you been? What has happened, and who are these people?" The doctor slipped out of his disguise with a thankful sigh. It had been hot wearing the heavy woolen cloak. Enkidu contented himself with just throwing the hood back from his hairy visage. Ninani choked back a scream when she saw him. You're that creature of Gilgamesh's!" She looked ready to scream for help. Engula leapt to her feet. "Peace, lady," she hissed. "He means no harm. He is here to help us with Ishtar, as is this other, the god Ea." Uncertainly, Nina subsided. Staring warily at the doctor, who doffed his hat politely, she finally said, "Forgive me, but I find it hard to trust any visiting divinities after witnessing what Ishtar has done." "And quite rightly too," the doctor agreed. "Terrible state of affairs here. But I'm here to do something about it. Engula has been telling us that you want her power broken." The princess nodded. "She is evil, and disturbs both my father and my city." She looked over him curiously. "Can someone such as you truly help us to defeat her?" "I'm probably the only one who can," he assured her. To Engula he added, "Perhaps you'd better tell the princess what happened to you." He stood patiently by as the priestess told the tale of the finding of the doctor and Ace's raid on the temple. The doctor tried to restrain his annoyance at this part. The girl then told of the planning session in Uruk and finished her tale. Ninani looked at each of them in turn. "So," she finally said, "Gilgamesh, Aya and the singer have gone in search of Utnapishtim, while you three have come here. To what purpose?" The doctor took up the conversation. "I really need to get a look into Ishtar's inner rooms," he explained. "All her equipment is there. I know she has implanted some kind of transponders in the minds of a number of people by which she can control them. I'd like to sever that link if possible, before we actually destroy her." "So," said a low, hard voice from the doorway, "you plot treason now, Ninani." They all spun around. Ninani paled with shock. In the open doorway stood her father, backed by several of his soldiers.